when I was trying to balance running a business in the mornings, evenings and weekends with having a 9-to-5 job at the same time, I didn't want to let anybody down.
The next task, what's then going to take you to the next level so that you're not constantly looking at the minutiae of the day-to-day task.
I knew that when I used to work in my job prior to becoming an entrepreneur and taking that leap into entrepreneurship, I had very limited time. I only had maybe a couple of hours before I started work in the morning and maybe a couple of hours in the evening when I got back.
However long you allow yourself to complete a task, you will inevitably take that long to complete it.
An example of this that happens, we see when people launch businesses for the first time, whether it be dropshipping businesses or whatever type, usually, is they focus on things like getting their website perfect or getting their logo perfect.
I think if we're going to talk about productivity in 2023,
it's like giving us an incredible base to work from, something we've never. Welcome to the Dropship Unlocked Podcast, where we unlock the secrets to high-ticket dropshipping and achieving financial freedom. I'm Lewis Smith, founder of Dropship Unlocked, and I'm joined by James Eardley, client success coach at Dropship Unlocked. Each episode, we'll be sharing our experiences and providing you with the tools you need to build a successful e-commerce empire of your own. From zero to owning £1 million online business, we'll help you achieve the ultimate freedom over your time, location, and financial future. And when we're not recording the podcast episodes or running our own e-commerce businesses, you'll find us helping people like you launch their own high-ticket dropshipping businesses. To learn more about working with us, head over to dropshipunlocked.com/free. Now sit back, relax, and get ready to access your full potential with the Dropship Unlocked podcast.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Dropship Unlocked podcast. I'm James Eardley, and I'm joined today by the founder of Dropship Unlocked, Lewis Smith. And I'm excited to be diving into an important topic for entrepreneurs or soon-to-be entrepreneurs. We're going to be talking all about productivity, some hacks about how you can be most productive with your time, and some tips and tricks from myself and Lewis in terms of running a business and how to be the most productive with our time as we can possibly be. So this is episode 12 of the Dropship Unlocked podcast already, and we release these episodes every week. So you can kick off your week by listening to one of these episodes, and we're thrilled to keep recording these and bringing these out every week for you. So, Lewis, great to have you with me today. Are you keen to dive straight into talking about productivity hacks?
I definitely am. Yeah, it's a great topic and something that can really supercharge people's efforts to creating a business like this. So yeah, let's dive into it.
Perfect. So our aim with today's episode is to talk to people how to run a successful dropshipping business, and it can also be applied to running it alongside your job. So how to be productive in that job to make sure you can free up your time to work on your business around your job, and however it works for you listening in today. So firstly, Lewis, why do we think it's absolutely crucial for people to think about their productivity? So if you're going to be going into an entrepreneurial pursuit and starting a new business?
Well, productivity is really what you can do to maximize the output that you get for the same time input, right? Because we're all given the same time allocation, yet some people end up achieving far more in life than others. And so really the secret to that, or one of the secrets to that, is making sure that you figure out a way of leveraging your time to get the most output for the time that you put in. So it's a little bit like if you put in this kind of high octane fuel into the engine of your business, it's going to allow you to get more power out of that engine versus someone that puts in maybe a low quality fuel, right? It's the same kind of concept. And I knew that when I used to work in my job prior to becoming an entrepreneur and taking that leap into entrepreneurship, I had very limited time. I only had maybe a couple of hours before I started work in the morning and maybe a couple of hours in the evening when I got back. And so I had to adopt some of the techniques we're going to talk about today to really start to build and grow that business so that eventually I could replace my income and I could take that step back. For me, at the time, the responsibilities, the outgoings that I had, it wasn't really an option to just quit and go full time on entrepreneurship and hope that I built it up. I had to get the boat as close to the dock before making the jump as I could. I had to build up that safety buffer. And so there are some great techniques that I use that I can share a few of now. I mean, one thing that springs to mind is I use a count up timer. So not a countdown timer, but I would use on the iPhone, I'd use the stopwatch feature. And when I sit down to start a task, it can work both ways. Sometimes the countdown timer can be good because you could set yourself like a 30-minute timer and say, in that time frame, I know my day job starts at 9 a.m. right? So it's 8:30 in the morning now. I've got half an hour to work on my own business. The clock is ticking down and I need to get something achieved in that time frame. Like, you need to be very clear on what the thing you're trying to achieve is. There's nothing like a timer to focus the mind and actually make you prioritize the thing that you're trying to achieve in that time frame. So that's one good technique. I find that I always end up getting really deep into the work as the point that the timer goes off. So I prefer the count up timer so that I know I'm still watching the clock, but it's not going to stop me at the point of expiry. The other thing is just making sure like you can drink lots of water, keeping yourself hydrated, trying to sleep well. I'm terrible on low sleep. I really just don't function well. I find exercising helps a lot too. So there are lots of different things that you can use in terms of like lifestyle techniques to make sure that you're getting the most out of your productivity and the most output for the time that you put in.
Yeah, I like that point of the countdown or count up timer. It reminds me of Parkinson's law, which is a law that dictates that however long you allow yourself to complete a task, you will inevitably take that long to complete it. So if you allow 2 hours to do it, it will take you 2 hours. Or if you give yourself a tight deadline and say, I've got to complete this task within 30 minutes, again, that's how long it will take, because you just will take as long as you've allowed for that task. So a really good point. And how can we then make the most of the time that we've got, especially if we've got a limited time? How can we maximize the time that we've got to allocate to a task?
Yeah, so the time allocation, you almost have to view time as like your most valuable currency, which it kind of is in a sense, right? So that way, productivity then becomes your investment strategy of how do I invest that time, right? So prioritizing tasks, eliminating distractions, and just cutting out any like wasteful spending, as if you were looking at your own personal finances and thinking, where am I spending money where I could recoup that and, invest those savings into better return models. It's the same kind of thing. Like, where's my time getting wasted and where could I better allocate that time to make sure that I get a great output? So for me, when I was trying to balance running a business in the like mornings, evenings and weekends with having a 9-to-5 job at the same time, I didn't want to let anybody down, right? I like to do every task that I agreed to do. I like to do it to the best ability that I can. So when I'm in a job, I don't want to start having my performance decline just because I'm trying to auto start a business. However, at the same time, I don't want to give absolutely everything I can in work so that by the time I get home to create the business that's my thing for the future, I've got nothing left in the tank. So it's like, I have to compartmentalize and say, for the next hour, I'm going to give absolutely everything I can to this one task that maybe a colleague has asked me to do. And I'm going to really do it justice so that, I feel like I've got high integrity and I can definitely say I gave it my all. But then I'd also do the same for the task that I'm working on to build my own business. And so one example of that could be that when I sit down to look at the customer support emails that had built up throughout a day working in my job, I would come back and my e-commerce store would have 30 emails or something like that from customers and potential sales inquiries. Well, I would sit down, set a timer and say, right, for the next 30 minutes, I'm going to work through those emails and really focus on it. And whilst I was doing it, I'd put my phone on do not disturb mode or airplane mode, set a timer, block out all distractions, close all other tabs. But I would always be thinking, what can I do to ensure that next time I log in to do this task, I have like a bank of templates there to speed this process up. So I would write out great emails, but then I would like save that email in like a Google Doc or a Google Sheet and kind of create, and you can actually do it in Google as well. In Gmail, you can create like what are called template responses, right? So you can just have like hi first name, and then you can just replace the customer's first name with that field when you need to use it again in the future. And these types of things are great because they speed up your productivity the next time you're doing that task. But they're even better because when you do eventually hire a team member or a VA, you can give them access to those things as well. And it even speeds up their time and their product. So that's almost like supercharging the supercharged results. Because once you hire a VA, if you can then increase their productivity, that's like you're then 2 steps removed from your time being spent, because not only is someone else's time being spent, but it's also being optimized as well. So there are almost multiple layers to that level of productivity.
Yeah. So first of all, being aware, I guess, is a huge first part of that, is how you're spending your time, and not just going through the day and going towards whichever distraction takes your fancy at a certain time, and taking a chance to reflect on where you spent your time, and then where you can improve. And then you can improve that time that you do spend on certain tasks and then outsource them in the future. That's a great process to have in place to remove yourself from the day-to-day tasks. So I guess you talk there about how once you've outsourced yourself, it can actually be a catalyst for improving your business and improving your output. So then once you have that process in place for removing yourself from certain jobs, clearly it's very important to have other people complete tasks for you. So what type of tasks are you quite quick to pass over to other people, and which jobs would you suggest for people, especially that are going to start in an e-commerce business, that they hand over to other people to outsource?
The first types of tasks would be the highly repeatable, systemizable, if that's a word, tasks where you have things that can just be taught, replicated, broken down into steps and passed on. Now, those actually are the vast majority of tasks. It's difficult for us as entrepreneurs sometimes to fall into the trap of thinking that only we can do a certain task. Challenge yourself next time you take on a complex task that you've done before. There must be a process. There must be steps as to how to do this. And if you can break it down into those steps and use a tool like Asana, for example, that we use to really systematize and create a set of standard operating procedures for that, you can pass it on. A good example of a bigger task that perhaps has a lot more moving parts would be like the migration of a theme, right? So if you have your website created, you have your store up and running, but you want to change the theme that it's built on, that's something that I've known in the past that I needed to do, but I would always put it on the back burner because it's a big task. It's a lot of undertaking. It needs a lot of different moving parts and things done. And so I kept delaying and thinking I'll tackle that at some point. But it just you never get to that point. So what I decided to do was, I need to bring in somebody in our team who can just focus on that solely, right? And this is where sites like Upwork are great, because you don't have to hire a full-time designer or developer. You can just partner with one for a short period of time for a fixed set fee and have them do that work. And that way you can step back from the detail and just focus on like project milestones and say, hey, we need a first draft or a wireframe design done by this date. We then need the preview theme done here. We'll do some user testing here, and then it can go live on this date. And that way the whole task happens. You were realistic with yourself from the start that if it was left to just you as the business owner, it was probably never going to happen, because it would have never been top priority, because the current theme worked. It just wasn't what you wanted. And it then allows you to get a lot more done by leveraging other people's time, if you look at it like that.
Yeah, so this is a crucial point for everyone listening. The only way that we can create massive success for ourselves is to have huge output from every day that we put in. So how can we get the most amount of output from the least amount of input? And by leveraging other people, that's one of the biggest things we can possibly do. So when you have a big task that you know is going to take your business to the next level, and you identify that perhaps changing a theme is that task, instead of you dedicating the next 2 months to doing that, which will take you away from any other task, how can you get somebody else who's an expert in that area? And then you can focus on the next task, what's then going to take you to the next level, so that you're not constantly looking at the minutiae of the day-to-day tasks. So these conversations, it does remind me of the 4-hour work week, and some of the tasks that we do naturally are work for work's sake. And this idea of work for work's sake is brought up in the 4-hour work week. It was the first time I came across it. And as soon as I heard this phrase, I realized that I was spending so much of my time doing work purely for the sake of doing work. So have you come across this as well, Lewis?
Yeah, so this, in the world of work, I think this presents itself very universally as like letting the inbox dictate what you do with your day. That's the common almost productivity standard in the corporate world. It's like you just sign in to your inbox, you see what emails are there, and then you let other people pull you in various directions to dictate your day. That's not the way that I would want to run my business now or have any of my team do it, but it was the way I did it. And when I read the 4-hour work week, I realized that all I was really doing by doing that was just treading water. I was just trying to kind of maintain, but eventually you just run out, you burn out, but you're not going anywhere. You're not doing anything or achieving much. You're just kind of fighting fires as and when they land in your inbox. And so after understanding the concepts in that book, I realized how efficient I was actually being with my time. Even though I thought I was busy, I was very inefficient. I was letting the inbox dictate my day. I wasn't batching tasks. So there's this task switch time and energy load that's required to say, okay, I'm going to finish doing that project, but now I'm going to start doing this one. And in order to switch to that task, there's a huge mental load that's required, and it takes you however long, 15, 20, 30 minutes to actually get into doing that next task. And also just saying yes to everything that landed, like all of the opportunities that would be presented. I just say yes to everything, and then you kind of end up with no time for yourself to actually do anything that matters. So once I started applying some of the principles from the 4-hour work week, like really defining my own goals, and then once I had those goals clear, eliminating the distractions and just working on how do I do this, and then how do I build in automations that can get us towards that stage automatically. So none of the treading water stuff is happening. Well, if it is happening, it's happening with a system, that automatically deals with those things. And then starting to delegate some of those bigger projects that I knew would really move the needle on the business, so that I could multiply my output by 10 by putting in somebody in place, either through Upwork or through like a virtual assistant who could do what I do, but 10 times more of it, because they're doing it full time and they have that time to invest in it.
Yeah, and I can completely resonate with that idea of treading water while you're at work and, working hard like a hamster in a wheel, but actually getting nowhere at the end of the day. And the biggest breakthrough for me in terms of how to be most productive with my time was coming across the 4-hour work week and the idea of work for work's sake, and realizing that because I had a 9-to-5 job and you were expected to work for 9 to 5, 8 hours a day, then even if you completed your tasks by 3:30 that day, because you're expected to be working till 5, you then just create work for yourself, or you make yourself busy for the next hour and a half on work that's not actually going to move the needle for the business or the roles that you have, but you're creating work for yourself just purely to get through to the end of those hours. And that then means you're just wasting your time in a way, because you're doing work that is just work to keep you busy, and it's not really going to help you to get anywhere. So I'm keen to think, how did you eliminate that idea of work for work's sake to make sure that you were 10 times more effective with the time that you put in?
One of the ways that I would do it is start by identifying your most important tasks and prioritize them. An example of this that happens, we see when people launch businesses for the first time, whether it be dropshipping businesses or whatever type, usually, is they focus on things like getting their website perfect or getting their logo perfect, right? And this can take weeks. Entrepreneurs, like, I'm on my 5th draft of the logo, and it's like, I'm constantly tweaking it. And do you think this, like, you see people put these things out on social media, like, which of my 5 logos do you think we should launch with? And in my mind, that's like, well, that's the wrong thing to focus on. Why not? Unless you are a graphic, and even if you are a graphic designer, if you're trying to create a business, you almost need to take off that designer hat, hand over the controls to someone who's going to focus fully on that eventually. But for now, get something that's like minimum viable version, minimum viable product up and running, because that's not the thing that's going to make you sales, the logo. So yeah, figure out what your most important tasks are. So for dropshipping, it might be getting your company up and running, having your website built to a minimum viable standard, and then signing suppliers, and then launching ads and actually driving traffic so that you can start making sales. And with the profit from those sales, reinvest that into a graphic design team who can revamp your logo and your branding, colors and fonts and everything, and make the whole thing look great, right? Don't spend your time doing that before you've made any money with it, because it's just an inefficient way to do it. And sometimes when you're starting out with the business, it's difficult to know, well, which are those big tasks? So there's a great book called Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy, which is a great system for ranking tasks. And he kind of has this concept of like, you look at a list. So if you ever have a to-do list, right, for your business, you look at, well, what are the A's, what are the B's, and what are the C's on there? So you write A next to all of the things that are the big ones. Then from your A's, what's A1? What's the absolute top, highest impact task you could be working on? Then what's A2? And then what's A3? If you rank them in that order, even if you only achieved A1 today, you would have made 90% more impact than if you had just tackled whatever the first few were on the list, right? So it's always worth doing that. That's one methodology that I use, which is quite nice.
Yeah, thank you for that book recommendation. So that's Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy. I haven't come across that one before. Perhaps I thought it was a French cookbook or something along those lines, but I'll pick that one up and have a read of that. So when you read that, how did you then apply that to work out what your most impactful tasks were and start to outsource the others?
Well, a good kind of practical example of how that might work is if you've just say your business is starting to grow, right? You're making sales, you're getting inquiries landing in the inbox, things are starting to happen. And say you brought on board your virtual assistant. So in week 6 of our program, we give you the templates, we kind of give you the video tutorials of how to actually hire your first virtual assistant. So you bring in the virtual assistant, but you've got hundreds of emails. Now, the temptation is for the virtual assistant to be there and you to just think, well, it's faster for me to just answer the emails because I know how to respond to them. But obviously, if you do that, you're treading water because the next day it's going to be the same thing and then the next day. So you almost need to take one step backwards to take 2 steps forwards, right? You have to figure out, well, the A1 task here is probably sitting down for 2 or 3 hours with the virtual assistant and either having them shadow me or just explaining to them how and why I would answer certain emails in certain ways and try and systematize that stuff as best you can so that if ever another member of the team joins and you have 2 virtual assistants, you have the processes, the recordings, the training captured. So you've leveraged your time, you sat down and did that A1 task once, and then give it a week, your virtual assistant will then have almost downloaded your brain, your thinking patterns, and be able to then implement that themselves by managing the inbox. And at that point, those hundreds of emails will be dealt with every day by them, and eventually even by automated systems, because you can have templates, FAQ libraries, things like that. And you've achieved a lot more for the long-term growth of your business than had you just jumped straight into the chaotic, time-demanding email inbox, which is so tempting to do.
Yeah. So on that point, would you say that hiring a VA, was that like one of the most beneficial things you did for productivity at an early stage?
Yes, it is a huge, high impact, high output move to bring in a virtual assistant. Now, when you're ready to do that is a different question. I would argue that you'd probably need to be at the point where you could afford to bring in and hire at least 2 virtual assistants before you even hire one, because you don't want to spend every last penny of your business profits bringing somebody in. Or maybe you do if you're really time poor and you don't have time for anything from the outset. Maybe that is the best use of your resources. But yeah, when you do bring in a virtual assistant, it's great, but you also need to learn to relinquish control and actually let them provide you with the benefit that you've hired them to provide. So an example of how that happens, and the mistake I see sometimes entrepreneurs make with that, is they bring in their first virtual assistant. Maybe it's the first time they've ever hired someone. And so the temptation is that they want to kind of look over the shoulder the whole time. And so I've heard of, and I've done it myself, when you first hire someone in for like phone support, for example, answering the phone to customers, which on our high ticket e-com stores is quite a common thing that you would outsource for, listening to phone calls that the VA is having with customers and just critiquing them constantly and like trying to micromanage. And you have to accept that they're not going to be able to manage that phone support on day one 100% of the ability that you will, because you're the business owner and of course you care the most. But if they can do it 80, 85, 90% and eventually become really good at it, eventually they can get to the point where they're better than you because they have more product knowledge. They'll get to know the industry that you're working in even better. But yeah, my advice would be don't spend too much time worrying about the minute details. Use the fact that you've brought them in to manage the phones to then say, well, what's the next biggest thing that I can be doing that's going to grow the overall business? And yeah, over time, you can revisit that. And if, call quality is dropping, you can start to help critique and manage that process. But don't spend the whole time listening to the thing that you've outsourced, because then you still use all your time and you're just paying someone else to take the calls, right?
Yeah. So it is easy to do. It's easy to micromanage or, feel like you need to have a really close eye on everything, but that's taking away from actually the leverage that you've gained through having somebody else on board. So let them take the lead, let them show you how good they are at different tasks, and take a step back so that you can focus on the really high impact tasks.
Yeah, and there are lots of different systems that you can use. The Eat That Frog system is one. There are lots of others. And in fact, there was a really good article that I came across when doing a bit of research for this episode that's on the Asana project management software website, which is the one that we use, although there are various others. And yeah, I will link it in the show notes because I think it would be a good one. Have a read through that, see which version of the prioritization mechanisms works best for you. And then just whatever one you adopt, just make sure you use it and get the most out of it.
Brilliant. So we've covered a lot of tips there for how to be most productive with your time and how to leverage others to complete the tasks that are low importance for you. But it's important now that we discuss, right, how do we actually apply those productivity tactics towards goals that we really care about? So it comes towards this idea of how do we set those goals that really matter and are really going to make a difference in our lives. So for me, when I sit down and decide on the goals that I'm going to apply my productive framework to, it's important that I split my goals into two different types. So I've got my lag measures, so the goals that you achieve that come after some time of work. So they're like your income goals, like £10,000 a month is a lag measure that comes after you put the work in, and that's the actual result you achieve. And the other type of goals that you put together are your lead measures. So these are goals that you achieve on a day-to-day basis because they're the things that you can see that you're doing that will eventually lead to your lag goals, so the results that you see. So for your £10,000 a month goal, that is your lag measure. So that's something you'll see after you put the work in. But the day-to-day tasks that you can do to get to that point are the income-generating tasks that you can do. So you're signing suppliers, you're adding products, you're putting your tasks for your VAs. These are all the sort of things that are the lead measures, and it's important to differentiate the two. If you focus purely on your goals being the lag measures, like the £10,000 a month, it's difficult to know what can you do on a day-to-day basis, and are you being successful towards that week by week? There's no way of knowing until you achieve that result. So that's why it's good to have the lead measures in place, which are also goals. And then at the end of each day or at the end of each week, you can tick off the boxes that you've put down in your tracking worksheet or a planner that you have, and you can see how much progress you've made towards that large goal. So important to do that. And that is a concept that's brought up in the 12-week year book by Brian Moran. So again, another plug for that book because it really helps you in terms of how to set goals. So how do you look at setting goals then? Do you also cultivate this idea of lag versus lead measures? And how do you sort of look at it in terms of actionable steps?
Yes, I definitely do. I would start with a big goal that's almost scary to the point of like, can we really do that? I think we can. And then you start to have to build that belief. That's where the things like the visualization board comes in. That's where you have to say, what does it feel like to be in the position of someone who has now done and achieved that goal? And that's what you tell yourself every day through whether it's affirmations, through whether it's just kind of surrounding yourself with podcast content that's to do with the thing that you're trying to achieve. And breaking it down into smaller actionable steps is key, because you can't just, like when you're learning a new language, you don't just say, right, okay, I'm going to France and I'm going to, from tomorrow, speak fluent French, right? It happens over time. It's gradual. You learn the basics, and maybe you set yourself a goal that's like, by next week, I'm going to have learned some basic nouns, like the basic things that will get you through the day. And then you start to overlay that and start to form smaller sentences. And then you start, as you take these small steps, you're working your way up to those larger steps until you reach your goal with it. And eventually you can become fluent. It's the same with business and with big goals. You don't just kind of achieve it straight away. You start by achieving these. And I think something that's really helpful is actually measuring the performance and the success as you go. So you say, yeah, today was a 9. I feel like I did really well today. But then the next day, maybe it was a 6. Why was it a 6? What did I miss? Maybe I didn't sleep well, or maybe I got distracted or whatever, so that you can kind of course correct as you're going, right? So those are like your leading indicators, because they're the things that are happening live, right? Once you reach the end of it, you'll start to see the results of your lag indicators, which come, like you say, after that time delay of having implemented the steps. And at that point, most people just look in awe and like say, how did you achieve that thing? That was incredible. How did you build that business? And because they're looking at the full thing with the outcome as the thing that they would set their target on, but you broke it up into chunks and steps, and that's how you did it, one step at a time.
Yeah, it's so important, because realistically, all we have is today. All we have is what we do in the next 10 minutes. So if you can really break it down into those small actionable steps, so you know what you can do that's the most effective use of your time in the next 10 minutes, that's how we get to those big, audacious goals that we've got. There's no point thinking about that massive goal from day one, because you can't expect to get there straight away. So if you can break it right down into what can you do for the next 10 minutes, that's when you're onto a winner, because you can really start to make progress towards your goals. So I think a big challenge for me when I first started, and often for new entrepreneurs, is time management, and how can we get the most out of the time we spend. So what are some effective time management tactics that you've come across and that you use to grow your businesses?
Well, the link that we've put below with the Asana guide would be helpful for this one to have a read through to figure out one that resonates well with you, because I think it will be different for different people. One thing I didn't know it was called this, but it is a technique that I've used in the past, is the Pomodoro Technique, which again, found out in the research for this episode. And it's where you start by picking a task and then setting a 25-minute timer. And then you work on your task until that time is up. Then you take a 5-minute break. And every 4 times you take a longer break. So you take a 15 to 30-minute break longer. So you're basically saying 25 minutes on a task with a 5-minute break. So you go and just have a walk around, change of scenery, stretch your legs. And then every 4 times that you've done that, you take a longer 15, 30-minute break. So it's almost like scheduling in breaks. But you know that if you do that, you're going to be more productive as you go. So that's one way of actual like hands-on time management. Other things are like, and this I guess you could argue is more of a prioritization method, but is the Eisenhower Matrix. So it's that you can probably visualize it as the graph where it's like urgent, non-urgent, important, not important, right? And so you want to focus on your important, urgent tasks, obviously first, and it just forces you to think in this like grid of 4 different quadrants. What are the things that are on my to-do list and where do they go, right? So it's a similar concept to the like A1, A2, A3 thing, but it's whatever works for you. There's no right or wrong with this stuff. And then thinking about when you actually schedule your most important tasks for. If you think, right, I've got a really important A1 task here, but first I'm going to deal with 100 emails and then do a full 9 to 5 shift, and then go and deal with, a load of other stressful stuff in life. And then I'll tackle that really high input or output task late in the evening when I'm shattered. Probably not a good way of doing it, right? So for me, it's the first few hours of every day that are the most productive for me. That's just because when I'm in a better mental state, physical state, I could go for a run or go to the gym in the morning, get some fresh air, some natural daylight, put on a podcast, some music, have a sauna, cold shower, like whatever. So I kind of have found over time, and this again will be different for everybody, but I find that for me, like time restricted eating or like intermittent fasting, not eating anything until lunchtime, from an energy level stabilization standpoint, I find that's my most productive way of starting the day. So I'll just have like a black coffee and just water, nothing to really like kickstart the metabolism, because then you don't get that big insulin spike and then the huge blood sugar crash afterwards. Instead, it's kind of just like, it gives you more of an edge, I find, a mental edge. I feel like I have a clearer head, more level energy. Don't get that post-food like digestive lull. And it's a bit weird at first because people are like, what, you don't have breakfast? You don't eat anything until lunch? But I know a lot of entrepreneurs that don't eat anything until like the evening. And then they get all of their like caloric intake for the day in kind of like a short time window. So this is becoming more and more popular and well known now. I don't think it's quite so weird, but yeah, I've found that in the last few years, that's something that's allowed me to get a lot more done in the start of the day, because there's just one less distraction, right?
Yeah, really interesting tactic that you've used now, and I have heard it becoming more and more popular in terms of the intermittent fasting idea. I guess we put all these strategies in place so that we can be as effective as possible, but there's just some tasks, would you agree, that we shouldn't be doing, or we shouldn't be using our most productive hours to do? I guess in some cases, we'd probably look to actually hand over those tasks to other people.
Yeah, exactly. You want to give it everything on the highest input tasks when you first start, but it's having somebody there who can take that from you and kind of then go with that task in the best way that they possibly can. That's when you supercharge your efforts. It's like when I was at school, I was I remember we had like a house relay team right in our school, and individually we were all quite fast runners, but we maybe weren't the fastest, but we could really go for the first 15 seconds of a sprint, right? So the way in a relay team, obviously that's great because you can give your all right up until the point where you're handing over the baton to the next person, and at that point they go from there 0 to 100. And they give it everything they have for however long they're running for, then they hand it over. And so as a team, we accomplished way more than any other team because we were each focusing on giving our all for our part and then handing it over when we got there. Obviously, that's the concept of a relay. But if you can apply the same thing in business where you're like, I'll do everything I possibly can to get this to the point where you can then do everything you possibly can with it as well. So creating the SOPs, giving them templates, not cutting any corners in that initial process creation and delegation will really set your team up for success.
So to support us with outsourcing and being the most productive that we possibly can, I know that technology plays a massive role in boosting our productivity. So how can entrepreneurs leverage automation and technology effectively?
The first way I'd recommend doing that is having experience personally of what the repetitive tasks are that you feel would be the highest impact. There's no point just thinking like, you kind of have to do the same thing even when you're automating to focus on what you want to automate. There's no point automating like everything and then half the stuff never even is required. Like even when you're creating an automation, you have to think, okay, what's my A1 for automation creation? Because you have to focus on what's the highest leverage automation you need to create. So a couple of practical, tactical, actionable examples that you could actually use today with that. You could create a Zapier automation from Shopify that triggers every time somebody abandons a cart or, abandons checkout. So gets to your store's checkout or cart page, enters their phone number or email, but then doesn't purchase. They don't go through to the actual complete their purchase step, and have the Zapier automation trigger an automation to Slack that then messages your team or your VA and says, please give this customer a call on this number. So you can have the field carried through to Slack. And then from there, the virtual assistant can call the customer and can just say, you could provide the script. You could even have the script put into the Slack message based on what you want them to say. So that's an example. Another thing would be if you had a supplier who have like a stock portal and you want your inventory levels updated on your Shopify store automatically, because you don't want to take up your time or your virtual assistant's time doing that manually, then you just do an automation that might be a little bit more complex, but maybe it pulls in the stock levels, puts it in a Google Sheet, and then from there it puts it through to Shopify. There are ways of doing these things. The Zapier support team are incredible. If you tell them what you want to achieve, they will always be able to help you do it in some way. Another option might be creating and distributing social media posts. So you might be trying to increase your social media presence, or at least just keep it active. Or can you schedule some stuff, or have your virtual assistant schedule some stuff at the beginning of the month so that the automation just sends those posts out across the entire month. So all of these different things can be automated. Obviously, with the rise of things like ChatGPT and Google Bard, the possibilities for what you can now automate are just expanding by the day. Things like blog posts or ad copy or headlines or email subject lines or social media posts, like all of these things can be done. Now, I was at an event the other day and was having dinner with Neil Patel, the SEO guru, and he was saying some really interesting stuff around like how the AI generated content is great, but you need that human input to really bring it to life still, because otherwise it's just sourcing information that already exists, which isn't new, and it's not going to give the search engines the signals that they require to really rank it. So he talks about this EAT, the expert authority trust methodology, where you want to try to inject some human input and have some human oversight over that material before it goes live. But I mean, it's like giving us an incredible base to work from, something we've never had access to before, right?
Yeah, I think if we're going to talk about productivity in 2023, we had to come across ChatGPT at some point, or leveraging AI tools just in general, because of how much that can level up the amount of output that we can create. Even if we use it alongside some human input, it gives us that huge shortcut compared to other people that are trying to do it all themselves. And as you say, ChatGPT, for me, in an e-commerce sense, has been huge for an e-commerce business. There's so many different angles you can go down to use it to leverage to improve your website or your ads or your blogs or anything along those lines. So it really does help us to leverage our time again and be really productive with the time that we do put into our business.
Yeah, and in a marketing standpoint as well, and campaigns to actually bring your product to the market, things like the new Google, or not so new anymore, but Google's Performance Max campaigns, early on, I think marketers were quite nervous about them because it was like, it took away a bit of our control and visibility, and we couldn't tweak as many levers as we used to be able to. But now we're seeing some really good results from Performance Max campaigns, where you just upload your assets, your product catalog, some images, some headlines, descriptions, and then let Google's machine learning do the working out for you. And it will run those as different, like hundreds of different combinations of ads to different audience types. And you can give it some audience signals and upload some here are the demographics I think we're targeting. And it will go out there, do a way better job than any human could ever do of figuring out what the best market product resonance is, and then get to the point where it starts to reach your target return on ad spend. It's incredible the amount of human input that has taken away the need for now. So yeah, I think that's a good one as well. And then from an actual e-commerce business management perspective, Shopify just simplifies the whole customer relationship management aspect of running a business like this, tracking your orders, knowing like what your customers' details are and addresses and how many times they've ordered and which items they are and tagging them. Like having all of that inside a platform that's as intuitive to use as Shopify is really good as well. So if you haven't tried Shopify before, there's a link in the show notes for this episode that gives you a free trial and 3 months of Shopify for £1 per month. So it's hardly anything, and you can check it out and see what you think. But it's a really good tool. We use it for all of our stores, and we recommend people starting out do as well, because it's the leader out there in e-commerce platforms at the moment.
Yeah, Shopify is an incredible tool, as well as Google Ads, which you mentioned as well. In terms of leveraging our marketing efforts, nothing comes close to leveraging the machine learning capabilities of Google. So I think a real concern for entrepreneurs and new entrepreneurs, especially if they're doing it alongside a job when they first start, is burnout, and this idea of burnout and overwhelm, exhaustion, whatever you want to call it. So I want to get into or delve into that. Have you ever experienced burnout, or how do you actively manage to avoid burnout? Because I know you're very busy and you do manage multiple 7-figure businesses. So have you got some advice around avoiding burnout?
Yeah, it's so tempting when you're passionate about the thing you do and you're an entrepreneur and there are no like restrictions on how much you work, right? Because it's not like I get to the end of the day and then someone says, right, time to leave the office. Like we as entrepreneurs, we could just continue working into the night. So you have to be quite strict on yourself. For me, it's the willpower isn't a problem. It's the willpower to stop that's the challenge. I have to make sure that I schedule time off to make sure that I actually take it, because I enjoy what I do. I love it. I love the process of building businesses and growing our team. But for me, I have to have that time to recharge mentally, physically, emotionally, make sure that I do those things. So things like exercising regularly, taking time, like just having some time to sit still in a room with no digital input is so important. And it's so rare in this day and age, because there are very few times where you've not got like music playing or a podcast or a TV on or a screen or Kindle or phone or something giving your brain like electronic signals as input. If you just have time to just sit there and think, sometimes it's so valuable and allows you to then see so much clearer as to like what you actually want to do with your goals and the rest of your day. And I think for that, having a really good morning routine is one of the most important things, because it kind of sets the tone for your day. If you just get out of bed, the first thing you do is check your phone, you're straight into emails, and then it's like, oh, I haven't even had time to shower, but now I've got a meeting. So it's like the day's already away with you, right? And if you're anything like me, those first few hours are when you'll get your most important A1 tasks done anyway. So it's like protect that time at all costs. Yeah, but I think taking regular breaks throughout the day is important, but even taking regular breaks throughout your year are super important too. So if you adopt the same methodology that we use with the 12-week year sprints, make sure after that time, and I know, James, we were just talking about this yesterday in a meeting, right? Have something scheduled for you, your team, that like rewards that achievement of that 12-week sprint. Because if you don't, and you'll be straight into the next one as an entrepreneur, what's the point in any of it? If you don't ever have time to enjoy the fruits of your labor, you're in another hamster wheel, right? And you don't want to do that. I think you take it from us, like take yourself out of the business and reward yourself for the things that you achieve, and you'll enjoy the whole process so much more.
So it does seem almost paradoxical to be considering time off and the importance of time off when you're thinking about how you can be the most productive with your work time as possible. But it was a groundbreaking breakthrough for me when I started to set a clear deadline at the end of the day where I would stop working. Otherwise, I would just keep going, like you say. I'd go to bed knackered because I pushed myself too hard, and then it'd be more difficult to start up again in the morning. And so I'd be less productive the next day. So when I started to realize that actually by stopping, I was being more productive, that was a real breakthrough for me to start being more productive with my time. So when we talk about burnout, which is a real concern for entrepreneurs or people in 9-to-5 jobs alike, it is possible to get to that stage. But I think if you're actively managing your time with some of the tips we've used today, and you also actively are, considerate the time that you have off to rest and recharge, you can definitely avoid that. Also, we're coming from a position where we can run e-commerce businesses instead of being stuck in 9-to-5. So we have the control over our time to put in place other people to do tasks that would keep us busy so that we're able to then manage our time more effectively. So that's something to consider. If you're in a 9-to-5 job, there is definitely less freedom in terms of avoiding that burnout. So that's why getting into an e-commerce store, we'd massively recommend to have control over your time again. So for people with 9-to-5 jobs at the moment, but they're wanting to become an entrepreneur and pursue their business dreams, what productivity tips would you recommend for them?
It's a tough one because you do have to, there is a time where it is going to be like working 2 jobs at once, because like I said, don't do your employer the disservice of not focusing on the job that you're doing for them. If you're going to do that, I'd rather you just leave the job, right, and then focus full time, because someone's paying you for your time. You want to be still a person of high integrity and give them your all for the time that you are an employee with them, right? But the minute that you make that transition, obviously, then it frees up so much headspace. I used to worry about this and think when I was working in a job and giving the job my all, but also then giving my business my all in the evenings and weekends and downtime, I couldn't do this forever. But and someone who was already an entrepreneur at the time said to me, I promise you, when you leave the job, you'll have so much more headspace that you'll be able to do so much more with your business than you're currently doing, and you won't feel as overwhelmed and busy. And that was very true. It was hard to see at the time because I was on the other side of it, but now I'm on this side of it. I can see what they meant. Having time dedicated to work on your business is important. So setting those clear boundaries, making sure that you do create a schedule that carves out that time for the creation of your business. I would treat that like a bit like you would arrive at your job to start work at 9. We'll have a schedule at the weekends that means that you arrive at your entrepreneurial venture to start that, because if you're not going to take that as seriously as your job, how do you ever expect it to take off? Right. So making use of that time wisely, I'd say, is important, and just getting it to the point where you can start to delegate and automate some of those tasks to really supercharge your efforts, so that by the time you can transition away from that or step back from that world of work, or even maybe if you just want, we talked in a previous episode about people who just want it to be a side business or a side hustle to create some extra income because they love their job and have no intention of quitting, and that's fine too. At that point, you would probably just want to create something that is fully outsourced and delegated so that it didn't take up any of your time as well. So yeah, it is a bit of a juggling act when you first start. You've got a lot of, there's a lot of things happening and a lot of plates spinning. But once you start to implement those strategies, you can really get the most out of your time. And it is much easier on that other side if that's something you're considering doing. Once you've relinquished and left the 9-to-5 job, you find so much more time for your business and so much more headspace to actually think about how you can grow it.
Definitely. It was an amazing first Monday morning when I woke up without the 9-to-5 job and having to juggle the two. But while I was in that 9-to-5 job, there were a few things that really helped me to be productive in my job as well as growing my business. The main thing for me was knowing that when I was at work, I was purely at work and there was nothing I was going to do in terms of thinking about my business. So that means that you know that you're 100% on one task and you're not switching between two. You can't multitask. I know I certainly can't. And as soon as you try to multitask, there's the switching cost that happens between switching tasks. So I've read somewhere that it's about 25 minutes or maybe more. If you get distracted or move on to a different task, it takes you 25 minutes to then get back onto the task you were doing initially. So by constantly switching between the two, all you're doing is actually getting nothing done, because you're constantly in that mindset between switching between the two and you can't fully focus. So if you're in a job, but you want to grow your business alongside it, tell yourself the exact time that you're going to be working on your business, and then you're not going to do anything else other than that. And then when you're in your job, you're going to purely be on your job and nothing else is going to distract you. And that's how you can be most productive with your time on both pursuits, not just one or the other. So now we'll talk specifically about high ticket dropshipping. How can entrepreneurs efficiently manage their high ticket dropshipping stores? So from your experience, while maintaining productivity?
Well, there are various tools that allow you to be very, very productive and leverage your input for a lot higher output. So we talked about Shopify already. We talked about Asana. So having processes that are set up for order fulfillment. You might have multiple suppliers and each one of those suppliers has a slightly different fulfillment method. Maybe, the way we teach with the Home Turf Advantage, you might be contacting some suppliers by email for their orders. Others might have a stock portal where you put the order in on their portal. Others, it might be by phone. You might have to call them up and make it. So if you can just systematize each of those, eventually you can hand that over to a human or even to an automation tool like Zapier, so that your team can actually work on things that only a human can work on, right? So it's always trying to find that point of leverage, using analytics tools to get insights into like your sales performance and figuring out what are the brands that are really working well, which ones should we push more in our marketing, and which ones do we need to improve, maybe which ones are wasting us money. And then of course you've got your marketing channels like Google Ads and Facebook and Meta Ads. I mean, there are so many things, right? And all of this is laid out in a very sequential process within our 6-week program. So it's kind of difficult to give the tactical steps to do that because it is designed in like 30 hours of over-the-shoulder video content. But yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic business model. It's very high leverage. And once you get it up and running the correct way from the outset, you really can step back from it from a time perspective where it is only a couple of hours per week time input to maintain, which makes it such a great business for location independence.
No, it really is. And all of these productivity tips and nuggets, golden nuggets that you've dropped in amongst this podcast episode, people can apply straight away no matter what their position. But specifically for a high ticket dropshipping store, it lends itself perfectly because we can outsource so much and really narrow down the amount of time that we spend on the business. So thank you for sharing all of those tips. Before we answer a question from a listener in today's episode, I guess we always like to have a really actionable advice for listeners that they can take directly from our episodes. So what would you say is one thing that a listener can do straight away to become more productive in whatever they're doing, and especially in terms of growing a high ticket dropshipping store?
Yeah, if you're listening to us and ready to start, then the best thing you can do is learn from others who've already achieved your goals, right? Take the shortcut to success, get the support plus the tactical step-by-step over-the-shoulder training. So head to dropshipunlocked.com/free to learn more. We'd love to help you get started on your journey and to help you like we've done for so many hundreds of our existing members already. Just a quick heads up, if you'd like to share your questions, stories, successes or challenges, you can email us directly at podcast@dropshipunlocked.com. And you never know, we might even feature you on the next podcast episode.
Also, if you want access to today's show notes or any of the resources we've mentioned in the episode today, then head over to dropshipunlocked.com/podcast. We also have a small favor to ask of you. If you enjoyed the show so far, you could take a minute to leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice.
You wouldn't believe how much your reviews help us grow the podcast. We'll even read out some of our favorites on the next episode. So if you want to be featured on the show, please do go ahead and leave us a review today. Thanks so much for your support. We really couldn't do it without you, and we absolutely love hearing what you think of the podcast.
Okay, so now we're into the part of the show where we answer a question from one of our listeners. And this question in this week is from JC. Okay, so JC has asked, he'd like to know about how to use social media, particularly from an organic point of view with regards to an e-commerce store. So any tips on what to focus on and how to be efficient but effective with what you do?
Yeah, so I probably wouldn't give too much focus to organic social media from the outset until I already had paid media or paid ads working effectively and profitably, because that's the thing that will give you results on like day one, because the platforms make their money. Meta, Google, they make their money from advertisers. That's where their revenue comes from. So why not be one of their favorite customers who they allow to jump the queue right to the front and just get your products in front of people on day one? Once you've done that though, and you have some money to set aside, then it kind of depends. I mean, I don't personally enjoy like constantly having to create content and posting on social media. There's enough on my plate. I'm running several businesses. I don't really have time for that. But there are people who I've hired who are very, very good at that. Their sole job is like social media management. And so I think you can leverage tools now like Google Bard, the AI tool, or ChatGPT, for example. But just be careful that you're not just using AI and then just posting it mindlessly. Have some human oversight of it, whether it's you or someone else on your team that you train up to do that. And then, you can be posting regularly. I'd say the main things we're really doing though with this type of model is just adding content to your social media profiles that validates and provides social proof to customers who are just checking you out because they're considering making a purchase from you from an ad that they've seen anyway, right? So posting customer reviews, posting maybe articles, buyer's guides, things like that can be good, but I wouldn't really focus on it too much unless your strategy is to go all in on organic and have that become a huge part of your revenue. But if that is your strategy, then I'd wait till your paid ads can fund your ability to hire somebody who takes that on as their sole project at that time.
Awesome. Thank you, Lewis. Yeah, I completely agree on that point. So now let's take a moment to highlight a fantastic listener review that we've had recently. So a big thank you to Giovanni for sharing your thoughts on the podcast. So Giovanni said, listening to Lewis's story about how he started his journey with dropshipping gave me a new motivation to not give up and be successful with my business.
Thank you so much, Giovanni. That's very, very kind of you. And glad to hear that the story inspired you, and best of luck on your journey. Would you like to hear your review read out on our podcast? If so, leave us a rating and review on whichever platform you're tuning in from, or comment on our YouTube channel, and we'll be sure to read out your comment on the next podcast episode. And don't forget to share this episode with someone you hold dear. Maybe there's someone in your circle who's been pondering as to whether they should launch their own business, and maybe they're just looking for an additional nudge of inspiration. Spread the positivity and support them as they begin their entrepreneurial journey, and share this podcast with them today.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Dropship Unlocked podcast. We hope you found today's episode useful and inspiring.
Remember, if you're ready to take the next step towards creating your own high-ticket dropshipping business, our step-by-step mentorship program can help. Just head to dropshipunlocked.com/free to learn more and get started on your own journey to financial independence.
Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss another episode, and leave us a review if you've enjoyed what you hear today. We love hearing from our listeners, and we'll even read out some reviews on the next episode.
And finally, thanks for choosing to spend your time with us today. We really appreciate you, and we'll be back soon with more valuable insights and tips on high-ticket dropshipping.